Marcus Sullivan gripped the pulpit with white knuckles, his voice echoing through the packed sanctuary of Grace Community Church. The afternoon sun streamed through plain glass windows, casting long shadows across the wooden pews where 300 faithful congregants hung on his every word. They worshiped statues, Marcus thundered, his gray eyes blazing with conviction. They pray to dead saints and bow before carved images, calling it holy. His voice cracked with emotion as he paced behind the altar, his tall frame casting an imposing shadow. In the front row, his wife Sarah watched with growing concern. She had seen this fire in Marcus before, but lately it burned hotter, more consuming. The congregation murmured their agreement, but she noticed several families shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus had been their pastor for 8 years, ever since leaving the Catholic priesthood in a crisis of faith that still haunted his sleep. The pain of that departure, the shame he carried, had transformed into righteous anger against the church that had once been his home. What his congregation didn't know was that every night, Marcus still woke in cold sweats, remembering the weight of the collar around his neck and the moment he walked away from everything he had once believed sacred. Tomorrow, Marcus declared, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled every corner of the sanctuary, we begin our mission to show this community the truth about false worship. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Grace Community Church to find a surprise waiting on the front steps. Wrapped in white cloth, a 3-foot statue of the Virgin Mary stood serenely in the Tennessee dawn, her hands clasped in prayer, her face peaceful and compassionate. Marcus's blood ran cold. The statue was exquisite, carved from what appeared to be marble, with delicate blue robes and eyes that seemed to follow him as he circled the unwelcome gift. A small card tucked into the cloth read simply, "From someone who believes in love, not division." Sarah, Marcus called to his wife, who was arriving with coffee for the morning Bible study. "Look at this abomination they've left on our doorstep." Sarah examined the statue carefully, her artistic eye appreciating the craftsmanship despite her husband's rage. "Marcus, maybe we should just quietly return it to the Catholic Church. Father Rodriguez seems like a reasonable man." "Absolutely not." Marcus's voice echoed across the empty parking lot. "This is a message, Sarah. They're trying to corrupt our church with their idolatry." His hands trembled as he stared at the statue's serene face, memories of his Catholic past flooding back unbidden. By Sunday morning, Marcus had made his decision. As the congregation settled into their pews, he wheeled the covered statue to the front of the sanctuary. If stories like this move you and you believe in moments where faith meets the unexplainable, make sure you subscribe because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about divine intervention. Today, we witness the destruction of false worship. Marcus announced, pulling away the white cloth with theatrical flair. The congregation gasped as the beautiful Virgin Mary statue was revealed in all its serene glory. Without hesitation, Marcus raised a sledgehammer he had concealed behind the pulpit. The first blow sent marble chips flying across the sanctuary. The second shattered the statue's outstretched hands. With the third strike, the peaceful face crumbled into fragments. "Thus we destroy the idols of Babylon," Marcus declared triumphantly, sweat dripping from his brow as he surveyed the destruction. But instead of the expected cheers, an uncomfortable silence fell over the congregation. Mrs. Henderson, a longtime member, stood up slowly. "Pastor Marcus, that statue was beautiful. It represented a mother's love." She gathered her purse and walked out, her footsteps echoing in the stunned sanctuary. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the statue's peaceful face just before the hammer struck. He woke repeatedly in cold sweats, haunted by dreams of his seminary days and the gentle Mary statue that had stood in the chapel where he once prayed daily. Sarah noticed the changes immediately. Marcus became obsessive, spending hours researching Catholic practices online, filling notebooks with anti-Catholic rhetoric. His appetite disappeared, and dark circles formed under his eyes. Marcus, "You're scaring me," Sarah whispered one evening, finding him staring at his reflection in their bedroom mirror. "You haven't been yourself since you destroyed that statue." Marcus turned to her with hollow eyes. "I did what God called me to do, Sarah. I won't apologize for defending the truth." Marcus's crusade against Catholicism consumed him completely. He organized weekly protests outside St. Joseph Catholic Church, holding signs that read, "Mary worship is idolatry, and salvation through Christ alone." His remaining congregants followed reluctantly, some beginning to question their pastor's increasingly extreme methods. Father Rodriguez, the elderly Catholic priest, watched from his church steps as Marcus led the protests. Instead of anger, the seasoned priest felt only sadness. He had heard about Marcus's background, how he had left the priesthood years ago under mysterious circumstances. The pain driving Marcus's anger was obvious to anyone who looked closely enough. "Father, shouldn't we call the police?" asked Maria Santos, one of his parishioners, as she watched Marcus shout through a megaphone about Catholic deceptions. "No, my child," Father Rodriguez replied gently. "This man is in great pain. Our response must be prayer, not retaliation." Meanwhile, Marcus's own congregation was fracturing. The Hendersons had left after the statue incident, followed by the Millers and several other families who found Marcus's methods too aggressive. His Sunday attendance dropped from 300 to barely 200. Sarah pleaded with her husband during their increasingly tense conversations. "Marcus, we're losing good people. The Johnsons have been with us for 5 years, and even they're considering leaving." "Good." Marcus snapped, his eyes wild with conviction. "We don't need weak believers who can't handle the truth. Better a small church faithful to God than a large one compromised by false doctrine." But late at night, when Sarah was asleep, Marcus would sit in his study and stare at the empty spaces on his bookshelf where his old Catholic theology texts once stood. By the 4th week of protests, Marcus's congregation had dwindled to barely 150 faithful members. The church's fellowship hall, once buzzing with community dinners and Bible studies, now echoed with emptiness. Financial contributions dropped as families left, forcing Sarah to quietly cut expenses and cancel several outreach programs. "Marcus, we can't keep the lights on if this continues," Sarah said, spreading the church's financial statements across their kitchen table. The Garrison family tied $4,000 annually. The Hendersons gave $3,000. "We've lost nearly $20,000 in annual giving." Marcus barely glanced at the numbers. "Money means nothing if we've compromised our souls. Sarah, God will provide for those who stand firm in truth." But Sarah saw the toll the crusade was taking on her husband. Marcus had lost 15 pounds, his clothes hanging loose on his once strong frame. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it never reached his eyes. His sermons had become one-note tirades against Catholicism, leaving their remaining members spiritually hungry for deeper teaching. Even his closest supporters began expressing concerns. Deacon Bill Thompson approached Marcus after service one Sunday. "Pastor, maybe we should focus more on our own spiritual growth rather than attacking other churches. Some of us miss your old teaching style." Marcus's response was swift and harsh. "Deacon Thompson, when the Israelites compromised with pagan worship, God sent judgment. I won't lead this congregation into the same apostasy by staying silent about Catholic idolatry." That night, Sarah found Marcus in his study, staring at an old photograph of himself in Catholic vestments from his ordination day 20 years ago. Tears streamed down his face as he held the picture with shaking hands. The call came at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in October. Sarah's sister Jennifer was sobbing into the phone from the regional hospital 40 miles away. Her 80-year-old daughter Emma had collapsed during a school play rehearsal, and the doctors couldn't determine what was wrong. "Sarah, they're talking about flying her to Nashville, but there's a storm coming. The helicopter can't take off," Jennifer cried. "Emma's getting worse, and they don't know if she can wait until morning." Marcus and Sarah rushed to the hospital, where they found Jennifer and her husband David in the waiting room, clutching each other in desperation. Emma lay unconscious in the pediatric intensive care unit. her small body connected to monitors and machines. Dr. Patterson, the attending physician, approached them with grave concern. "We've run every test available here, but Emma needs specialized neurological care that we simply don't have. The nearest pediatric neurologist who can see her immediately is Dr. Maria Castellanos at St. Mary's Medical Center." Marcus felt his blood run cold. St. Mary's was the Catholic hospital in town, the very institution he had railed against in his sermons as part of the Catholic Empire. "There has to be another option," Marcus said, his voice tight with conflict. "Pastor Sullivan," Dr. Patterson replied gently. "Dr. Castellanos is the region's leading pediatric neurologist. She saved dozens of children with conditions like Emma's. Your niece needs her expertise tonight." Jennifer grabbed Marcus's arm desperately. "Please, Marcus. I know you have issues with Catholic institutions, but Emma is dying. Please don't let your beliefs prevent us from saving her." Marcus stared through the window at his unconscious niece, his crusade suddenly feeling hollow and meaningless in the face of a child's life. St. Mary's Medical Center stood like a beacon in the storm-darkened night, its illuminated cross visible from the parking lot where Marcus sat in his truck, paralyzed by internal conflict. Sarah had already gone inside with Jennifer and David, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to walk through those doors. The hospital lobby was everything he had preached against. Beautiful stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes, a statue of Saint Joseph in the corner, and yes, a prominent image of the Virgin Mary with the Christ child. But as Marcus reluctantly entered, he was struck by something unexpected, the atmosphere of genuine compassion and care. Nurse Patricia Martinez greeted them warmly despite recognizing Marcus from the protests. "Dr. Castellanos is already reviewing Emma's scans," she said kindly. "She's one of God's gifts to children in crisis." Dr. Castellanos emerged from the elevator 30 minutes later, her presence commanding yet gentle. Marcus braced himself for confrontation or judgment, but instead found himself facing a woman whose only concern was his niece's welfare. "Emma has a rare form of temporal lobe epilepsy," Dr. Castellanos explained, her accent barely perceptible. "We can control it with immediate intervention, but she needs surgery within the next few hours." "Doctor," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, "I owe you an apology. I've said terrible things about this hospital and Catholic healthcare." Dr. Castellanos looked at him with genuine surprise, then smiled gently. "Pastor Sullivan, I know who you are, but tonight, you're simply a man who loves his niece. That's all that matters to me." Emma's surgery lasted 4 hours, ending successfully at dawn. Dr. Castellanos emerged from the operating room with tears of joy in her eyes, announcing that Emma would make a full recovery. Marcus watched his family embrace in relief, feeling something crack open inside his hardened heart. Exhausted and emotionally drained, Marcus decided to drive home alone while Sarah stayed with Jennifer at the hospital. The October morning was crisp and clear after the storm, with wet leaves scattered across the winding country roads between the hospital and his house. As Marcus navigated a sharp curve near Miller's Creek, his mind replayed the night's events. Dr. Castellanos' compassion, the gentle care of the Catholic nursing staff, the peace he had felt in the hospital chapel where he had reluctantly prayed for Emma. Everything challenged his carefully constructed worldview. Lost in thought, Marcus didn't see the massive oak tree that had fallen across the road during the storm. His truck slammed into the trunk at 45 miles per hour, the impact crushing the front of the vehicle and pinning him inside. Blood flowed from a deep gash on his forehead as consciousness faded in and out. His left leg was trapped beneath twisted metal, and he could taste copper in his mouth. The truck's radio crackled with static, his cell phone lay shattered on the floorboard, and the isolated road meant no immediate help was coming. "God," Marcus whispered through broken lips, "I've been so proud, so angry. If I die here, please don't let my hatred be what people remember." As darkness crept into his vision, Marcus thought he heard footsteps approaching through the fallen leaves, and then a woman's gentle voice saying, "You're going to be all right, son. Help is coming." Marcus drifted between consciousness and darkness, aware of gentle hands working to free him from the wreckage. Through his blurred vision, he glimpsed a figure in blue moving with impossible grace around the crushed truck, somehow lifting twisted metal that should have required hydraulic equipment. "Stay with me," the woman's voice whispered, filled with infinite compassion. "Your work isn't finished yet." When paramedic Jake Morrison arrived on scene 20 minutes later, he found Marcus mysteriously freed from the wreckage and lying safely beside the road, his bleeding controlled by makeshift bandages. The truck's roof had been peeled back like a tin can, but Morrison couldn't understand how anyone could have accomplished such a rescue. "Sir, who helped you out of the vehicle?" Morrison asked as he checked Marcus's vital signs. Marcus tried to focus through his concussion. "A woman in blue," he whispered. "She said help was coming." Morrison looked around the empty road, confused. His radio crackled as he called for backup. "Dispatch, we have one victim, conscious and stable. But I'm not seeing any Good Samaritan on scene." At the hospital, Dr. Castellanos couldn't hide her amazement at Marcus's condition. "Pastor Sullivan, based on the photos of your truck, you should have multiple fractures, internal bleeding, possibly fatal injuries. Instead, you have a concussion, some lacerations, and a bruised leg. It's medically inexplicable." The tow truck driver, Tommy Chun, later told reporters something that made the local news. "I've been pulling cars out of wrecks for 15 years. That truck was compressed like an accordion. No way a human being walks away from that, let alone gets pulled out without the jaws of life. Something supernatural happened on that road." During his 3-day hospital stay, Marcus couldn't escape the mounting evidence of divine intervention. Sarah had brought him the local newspaper with the headline, "Miraculous Rescue on Miller's Creek," featuring photos of his mangled truck that made seasoned first responders shake their heads in disbelief. Nurse Martinez stopped by his room on her rounds. "Pastor Sullivan, I've worked emergency medicine for 20 years. I've never seen anything like what happened to you. The paramedics are calling it a miracle." Dr. Castellanos reviewed his charts with clinical amazement. "Your brain scans show no signs of traumatic injury, despite the severity of the impact. Your blood pressure stabilized impossibly quickly. Even your lacerations are healing at an accelerated rate." But it was Sarah's revelation that shook Marcus most deeply. Sitting beside his hospital bed, she confessed something she had kept hidden for weeks. "Marcus, I have to tell you something about the night you destroyed that statue," she said, her voice trembling. "After you fell asleep, I went to the sanctuary to clean up the marble fragments. As I knelt there gathering the pieces, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. And I heard a voice, clear as day, saying, 'Pray for him. His heart is breaking, not hardening.'" Marcus stared at his wife in stunned silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me then," Sarah replied gently. "But maybe now, after what you've experienced, you're ready to hear that God's love is bigger than our denominational boundaries." That night, alone in his hospital room, Marcus finally allowed himself to examine the possibility that his crusade had been driven not by righteous conviction, but by unhealed wounds and misdirected pain. On his first Sunday back at Grace Community Church, Marcus stood before his remaining congregation with bandages still visible on his forehead. The sanctuary felt cavernous, with only 90 people scattered across pews that once held 300. "My friends," Marcus began, his voice stripped of its former fire, "I owe you all a profound apology. My crusade against our Catholic neighbors was born not from divine calling, but from my own unhealed pain and pride." The congregation sat in stunned silence as their pastor continued. "3 weeks ago, I nearly died in a car accident. The doctors can't explain my survival, but I know in my heart that I was saved by grace I didn't deserve from a source I had spent months denouncing." After service, Marcus made the walk he had avoided for 8 years. St. Joseph Catholic Church sat just 4 blocks away, its bell tower casting a long shadow across the town square. Father Rodriguez was tending his garden when Marcus approached the rectory. "Father," Marcus said, his voice breaking, "I've come to ask your forgiveness. The elderly priest set down his pruning shears and studied Marcus with kind eyes. "My son, I forgave you the moment you began your protests. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." Over coffee in the rectory kitchen, Marcus poured out his story. His departure from the priesthood after his mother's death, his crisis of faith, his marriage to Sarah, and his gradual transformation of grief into anger against everything Catholic. "I destroyed a beautiful statue of Mary in my church," Marcus confessed. "I think she may have been the one who saved my life." Father Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. "Mary's love extends beyond denominational boundaries. Marcus, she sees hearts, not church affiliations. Your healing journey is just beginning." 6 months later, on a warm spring Sunday, something unprecedented happened in the small Tennessee town. Grace Community Church and St. Joseph Catholic Church held a joint service in the town park, with Marcus and Father Rodriguez sharing the makeshift pulpit. Marcus stood before the combined congregations, his transformation evident in every word. "I spent months preaching division in the name of truth, but I learned that love is the highest truth of all. My Catholic brothers and sisters showed me Christ's compassion when I deserved only judgment." The crowd of nearly 400 included many familiar faces who had left Grace Community during Marcus's crusade. Emma, now healthy and vibrant, sat in the front row with her parents, living proof of the healing that had begun this journey. Dr. Castellanos attended with her family, still amazed by the chain of events that had led to both Emma's healing and Marcus's transformation. The paramedic Jake Morrison was there too, still puzzled by the mysterious rescue he had witnessed. As the service concluded, Father Rodriguez made a special announcement. "Today we dedicate a new statue of Our Lady of Unity, donated by both congregations and blessed by Pastor Sullivan himself." The beautiful marble statue, carved by a local artist to replace the one Marcus had destroyed, stood in the town square where both churches could see it. Marcus had insisted on personally placing the cornerstone, his hands steady as he positioned the foundation. Sarah watched her husband with tears of joy, remembering the angry, broken man he had been just months before. The community that had been divided by denominational warfare was now united by shared miracle and mutual forgiveness. Have you ever witnessed something that science couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments below, and let us know if you've experienced moments where the impossible became possible.